Joining us today in the studio is Knesset member Oded Forer with more on how the government plans on combating terror organizations through legislation. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Great, I'm great. So, obviously we're seeing a lot of problematic news today, and I want to start out with this issue that we're seeing with the World Vision organization. How can the Israeli government deal with organizations like World Vision, and is what we're seeing an example of a more widespread problem, or is it more specifically an individual in the organization that's responsible for what took place?
I think that the problem is not with the organizations, but the problem is with the terrorists, because we need to understand that the terrorists, and of course the terrorist organizations, are not going to go for any way that they can get money from people in order to get it to the military groups that they have. So what we saw with World Vision is, unfortunately, tens of millions of dollars that were people donated in order to help children, in order to purchase medicine and food for poor kids and families, went out just through this pipeline of Muhammad al-Halabi in order to help the Hamas and the military groups of Azadin al-Qassam and other terrorist groups which were only wanted to kill people instead of helping them.
Interesting. So, how will legislation play a role in imprisoning Muhammad al-Halabi or, the people who are responsible for even involving him in where this money is being transferred to?
First of all, in order to catch Muhammad al-Halabi, we need intelligence. And our legislation is allowing the intelligence borders and the intelligence groups of the Israeli military forces to know many specific information about people which are taking place in this country and what are they acting and what they are doing. Of course, unfortunately, those people are making bad name for the human rights organizations, and they are just hurting the ability to help people which needed help. But we need to let more power to the intelligence forces of the Israeli army and the security forces of Israel in order to catch those people. And when we will catch them, people will know what kind of organizations are really helping children and what are eventually helping terrorists.
So do you think it's fair for the Israeli government to be skeptical of all aid organizations that are working within Israel and the Gaza Strip right now?
I think that in Israel, it's okay for us to be skeptical about everything.
Just generally?
Because you can never know, I once asked my father, how do you recognize a crook? He says, you don't know a crook because he's a crook. He just looks like he's helping everybody and he's okay, but he's a crook. And this is what the terrorists are doing. Unfortunately, like they shot missiles from hospitals in Gaza to Sderot, they are using human rights organizations in order to fund their military groups. So what we need to do is to open our eyes very carefully. And this is what the legislation in Israel is doing. If we want to see what kind of money is moved to NGOs in Israel, we need to know from where this money is coming from and what is the purpose of this money. And if we will look where the money goes, we can know eventually if it goes really to poor kids and poor families or, unfortunately, to terrorist groups.
Now, so speaking about terrorists and legislation to deal with the issues that terrorists pose to Israel, in the last few weeks, we've seen a government push to strip the benefits from terrorists that are already being imprisoned by Israel. Can you talk to us about that? What is this new? I understand that there's a new bill that's being drafted.
I drafted a new bill about the terrorists which are now in prison in Israel, in order to understand those prisoners have many rights that even people which are not in prison, they don't have. Like for eventually we saw the football, the soccer tournament that was held last month. They could see and could watch it, which is cost money for people in Israel, but they could watch it for free in the prison. So this is something absurd and unheard of. We think the terrorists prisoner need to be a prisoner. They don't need to be organized in groups and political parties. Unfortunately, now many of them are organized. And sometimes, if a guy is getting into prison as a terrorist, now he's combined with terrorist groups, and when he goes out from prison, now he's one of a big military of the terrorists outside of prison. And unfortunately, many of them are also using the connection that we can do, that they can do with people outside of prison in order to send them orders how to do terrorist attacks against Israelis.
Well, what's interesting to me is, will this legislation help? Because we also see abroad, there are these different movements to provide some sort of rehabilitation for prisoners, to remove them from being in environments like this where they're exposed to other criminals as well who they could, collaborate with. What is necessary to prevent, people who go back on the street from recommitting crimes, and how do you deal with the people that are going to be there for the rest of their lives?
First of all, you need to spread those prisoners. You can't put them in one group. And unfortunately, in the Israeli prison now, they are in one group. As we saw just last week, they said they're going to do a strike, those prisoners, like this is some kind of working organization. It's not a working organization, they are prisoners. We need to spread them in all over the prisons around Israel in order that they won't be a group that can make some pressures on the Israeli government like they tried to do last week when they opened the strike, because they didn't like what the guards did for them and because they stopped them from using their cell phones. So what we need to do is to spread them all around the country in different prisons, and of course to prevent the many rights that other prisoners have, because other prisoners doesn't try to do terrorist attacks while they're in prison.
True. And rehabilitation, is that something that's just off of the table?
I think that rehabilitation is something that, first of all, the prisoner needs to understand that he wants to do it. If he doesn't want to do it, we can't make him a rehabilitation. And about the environment that he's coming back to. If they are coming back from the prison to their village or their city, and they are getting them with flowers and just giving them money because they killed someone, it's not going to do a rehabilitation. I think that this is the problem that we are having with the Palestinian Authority, which is financing families of people that did crimes against Israelis.
I'm curious to understand, why has there been such a push recently, to deal with this issue?
I think because we saw at the last year that many terrorists started again to raise their head, and many terrorist attacks are starting to be around Israel. Also, if it's only with knives and not the suicide bombers that we had 10 or 15 years ago. But what we need to understand is to see how many terrorist attacks are prevented by the Israeli security forces. And I think that we see an increase of trying to do terrorist attacks. We need to just send a big and important message to the terrorists. Terror is not an option. If you want to deal with us, if you want to negotiate with us, you need to put the terror aside and to stop dealing with terror. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority and yet many leaders in the Arab groups are promoting terror. And we need to do many harsh steps in order to prevent it.
Well, thank you for coming in and telling us about this new legislation that you are pushing forward.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Thank you.